All right, I'm gonna go. All right, well, hello everyone, welcome. I'm so excited to be here today to launch the brand new, fantastic middle grade, The Art of Running Away by Sabrina Kleckner. Thank you so much for being here. First things first, my name is Jacob, my pronouns are he and they, and I run a very queer book club. And I would like first just all the fantastic authors that I have here to go around and introduce themselves, and then we will jump in. Let's start with AJ.
Hey everyone, my name is Andrew Sess. I write under my initials AJ, and my pronouns are he and they. I am the author of Anna on the Edge, which is a middle grade contemporary novel about a competitive ice skater learning to navigate her newly discovered non-binary gender identity both on and off the ice. And the forthcoming middle grade contemporary novel, Ellen Outside the Lines, which is about a 13-year-old autistic kid who is, yes, right there. I guess I have both books too. Ellen is desperately trying to reconnect with her best and only friend, Laurel, on a Spanish school trip to Spain. And then hijinks ensue. Both books are out from Little Brown Books for Young Readers. Ellen will be releasing on March 22nd of next year. Otherwise, I am an avid traveler when it is safe to be traveling around the world. I love to do that. I'm also a competitive ice skater. Just got back from my synchro skating team's first competition of the season a couple days ago. And when I'm not skating and traveling, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area where I am now.
Amazing. Esme?
Hi, I am Esme Symes-Smith, and my debut middle grade novel, Sir Callie and the Champions of Helston, is coming out with Labyrinth Road in fall 22, TBD. I'm originally from England, but I moved over to Missouri to be with my very nice wife and our 2 puppies. I wrangle preschoolers in my free time, and I used to barista, and I'm never doing that again.
And then the icon of the hour, Sabrina.
Oh my gosh. Hi, yeah, I'm Sabrina. This is my book. It's out today. It's about a 12-year-old girl named Maisie who runs away to London to look for her estranged older brother and convince him to help save their family's bankrupted art shop. And yeah, it's just like a lot of angsty siblings, and I liked writing it a lot. So hopefully people like reading it. And when I am not writing, I'm a English teacher in Korea right now. So it's actually 7 a.m. for me right now, which is fun. But yeah, that's me.
Well, thank you for being up so early for this. This is so great.
Oh no, I'm excited.
Let everyone know now, if you have any questions for Sabrina about the book, about writing in general, just drop them in the chat. We'll have some time at the end for those. But first, I would love to chat, Sabrina, and I'm sure the other fantastic authors here have more exciting questions than I could ever come up with because they're actually writers. I would love to know a little bit about your process and kind of where you got started in publishing and anything you have coming up.
Sure, yeah. So do you mean like in terms of when I started writing, or just like in general, like
in general, whatever you would like to talk about, and then we can get into specifics.
Sure, yeah. So I can just start, I guess, with my writing journey. I started writing when I was 12. My first book, which was about child murderers, which was, listen, I really loved that book, but it was already, from the start, a whole mess. I started writing it when there was that really like big boom in the category of like 13, 14, 15-year-old like middle grade fantasy books. Like those were all that I read as a kid. But it took me like 8 years to finish writing this book. So by the time I finished writing this book, that genre or that age range, which is gone from publishing. So that was really upsetting because then when I tried to start querying and publishing it, there was no age category for it. So I stopped writing that book. And then I wrote another book, a YA contemporary book that I hoped would be a little bit easier because no fantasy world building or anything like that this time around. But I decided to make life hard for myself for no reason and made it 4 points of view, for absolutely no reason. And it ended up just being a disaster to try and revise. And I worked on that for way too long, just so frustrated in terms of revising. And then I started writing this book for my senior thesis in college. So I wrote that in a semester or so, which was the fastest I've ever drafted a book because I had to for school. And it was also just the most straightforward book I've written, just middle grade, contemporary, one point of view, nothing too complicated. Yeah, so I wrote that, and then I finished like writing and revising it over the summer after I graduated, and I started querying it in like August or so, and then I found my agent in, I think it was February, like right before my birthday that year, which was fun. And then we went on submission like pretty soon after that, and then now it's a book out today. Yeah.
So do our other friends have any questions for Sabrina?
How much did it change from like first draft to this?
I'd say like not that much, but also kind of a lot. Like the overall like heart of it, I don't think has changed. And like story wise, like it was definitely the least complicated in terms of like revising that I've written, in terms of it just like being kind of linear. But like there were some like weird things in earlier versions that are no longer in this version. Like for example, I think you read the version where like at the end of the book for like this weird twist ending where like Maisie finds out Callum was the one who like bankrupted the shop like kind of on purpose. And it like it made no sense. Did you not read that?
I don't
Okay,
remember.
good.
I don't think so. The ending made sense to me, so probably not.
I think I like Megan signed me for that version. I think we initially went on submission with this version where like at the end of the book, like at the climax, like when like at like there's like only a few chapters left in the story, and Maisie finds out that Callum like just like intentionally sabotaged the shop, and it was only in there because I wanted like some big like twist ending, but it was
I think Megan must have made
no
you revise that before you sent it to me.
Yeah, it made no sense whatsoever, and I was like purely for shock value, but it was awful.
That is very shocking.
Yeah, it made no sense, and then like to try and like wrap that up in, I had like 3 chapters left in the book. It was yeah. So no,
I feel that
did
sets you
not
up well
do
for
good.
a sequel though.
Yeah, it would have been.
What I'm curious about is, did you always know you wanted to set it overseas, or when you first started writing this book, what was kind of that little spark that got you to want to explore the idea further? Was it the overseas aspect, the sibling relationship, or something else?
Yeah, so that's actually like where the whole book kind of came from, I think. So when I started writing this, I had just come back from studying abroad at the University of Edinburgh. And it was like, I loved Edinburgh. It was like my favorite city I've ever been to. It's so pretty. Definitely recommend going if you haven't been. And yeah, so when I came back, I knew I had to write a book for my senior thesis. And I knew like immediately that I wanted to at least like partially set it in Scotland. And then because I was already setting it in Scotland, I also really love and like have lived in London. So I also wanted to write about London. And then like from there, I kind of crafted the rest of the story. So it all like hinged on the fact that I really just wanted to write about like a character traveling abroad.
Were you ever tempted to write it from Callum's POV?
Not this one. I was tempted to write like a prequel or something, or like something involving Callum, but I think like with this story in particular, it very much was always going to be from Maisie's point of view. But I am tempted.
I would love to know, I mean, obviously we're here celebrating this, but do you like is middle grade kind of, I know you mentioned you've written a YA, is middle grade where you thinking you're going to kind of live for a little bit, or what other types of writing are you looking at doing?
Yeah, so I have this problem where every single book that I have written is like very much in that category that is between middle grade and YA, and then I have to like somehow fit it into one category or the other. So like I think this one very much is middle grade and does feel like middle grade, but it does like definitely like lean a little bit, I think, older as well. So that was me kind of like putting it into middle grade. And then my YA book is like the swimming one that I wrote before this is definitely a YA book, but like my main character is 14 and she's in 9th grade. So like, again, I have to kind of like shove it into that category. And then the first book I wrote was like the 13-year-old child murderer, so which just like didn't fit in either category really. So yeah, I think it's less about like me choosing one. I just really like that like in between like middle space. I think I wish there was still like more of a place for that in bookstores, because I think there's so much that like of interesting things that happen in that age range to explore. So yeah.
Well, it's an age where like everything changes.
Yeah, and there's so much drama, like so much friendship drama, so much like romantic drama, so much family drama, just so much going on at that time. Yeah, so much drama.
I feel like the market in the UK is more forgiving for books in that category.
Yeah.
At least from my experience growing up in England, I read all of those books. Like Philip Pullman's books were very iconic, but what are they? No one knows.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's
everything,
like that, those books like Narnia, like all they're like all kind of in that in between area.
I know, they're a hot market mess, and I wish I could write them too.
When I feel like doesn't the UK kind of advertise young adult as slightly younger, like ages 12 to 16 or something, as opposed to 14 to 18? Because I think one of my anthologies published over there, and I was like 12, that's middle grade, but not for the UK. So
interesting.
I feel like it's just like juvenile lit.
Juvenile,
and that just encompasses like everything.
I also feel like YA has like skewed so much more adult recently.
Older,
yeah, which like is like, I like those books and they're great, but I feel like there is like this like missing category now between like 13 and even like 16-year-olds now. I feel like most YA is like 17, 18-year-olds. Yeah.
I feel like it's a similar size chunk to what we need with new adult as well. Like just those like, I don't know, missing pieces.
Yeah, I would love that category too. I also write there, so it's like the two places where there's no actual category.
Catherine in the comments just said yay for upper middle grade. So the feeling is mutual, it seems, across the board.
Yeah.
And I've definitely noticed that a lot of middle grades coming out soon or have come out recently are like the 14, 13, up to 13 sort of age, which is nice.
Well, and I'm curious because you mentioned that you had thought about doing something from Callum's point of view, but that would have put it in a different age bracket. You think would that? I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, so I've considered doing, so all of this stuff was like things that I was considering after writing this one. So like I was always going to do this one first, but I've had just like very broad ideas for other like wild things I could do. So like I had an idea for like writing a prequel about Callum in college, but then I've also had ideas about writing like a sequel about Maisie in college. So I've just gone like all over the place. Yeah, I don't know. I really like this world and like the characters. So it is tempting to like potentially explore something else. I don't really have plans to do that, but I've thought about it.
So we have to start
you flesh out Callum and his friends so thoroughly.
Yeah, I do. I just have like a very like vivid idea of like what went down in their university days. So I feel like that's like all in my head. And I also have like a pretty good idea of where like Maisie would end up as well. Like when she's in college, like I picture her going back to London and like going to University of London. And like I have like a whole like thing in my head too. So we'll see, maybe.
And Benjamin in the comments said there's so much drama and some things never change, which I think is true. Like it seems like both of the areas that you were interested in, it's, you know, upper middle grade and the new adult. There's lots of drama in both of those.
Yeah,
that hasn't been explored a lot.
Yeah, well, I think they're both like very pivotal coming of age time periods where like when you're 13, you're like just becoming a teenager and like you're going from being a child to suddenly being a teenager, and then like freshman year college era is like the same thing. You're going from a teenager to like suddenly being an adult in the world. And I think those time periods are just so interesting. And yeah, I love like reading those and I love writing those. So.
And don't forget, people, if you have any questions for Sabrina, just drop them into the comments. We will have some time for that at the end. So now that we've talked about you, I'd love to chat some more about your wonderful, wonderful book. And one of the things that we were chatting about in our little group thread before we hopped on here were all the different themes that are kind of represented in it and how we wanted to talk about those. And one of the ones that I love the most, and I would love to hear some of your thoughts about it, is the idea of found family versus your given family. But in this, they've kind of melded to get, because like you know, her brother is technically her given family, but he feels like a found family in some way. So I'm just very curious as to how you approach the different definitions of family within it.
It's so funny that you had mentioned that, because when I looked at like your outline that you had just posted, I had been, before that, I was like, there isn't really found family in this book. I feel like it's just about given family, but like that's definitely not true at all. Like it's very much a mix of the two, which I think is interesting. And I was thinking about just how I think it's really important to have like a found family, even if you can have a given family in your life, which is, I think, what Maisie kind of learns from this, because she starts off the book just like very entrenched in her family. Like she loves her family and she loves her family's job. Like they work at this, they have a portrait shop together, and she really loves doing that. It's her whole life. Like that's what she imagines herself doing for her whole career in life, which is great, but she's never like experienced anything outside of that. And I think her like going to London and meeting Callum again for the first time in a long time, and like, you know, meeting his friends and like his life that's outside of her life is just really important to her own growth of like realizing that like I think she needs some distance from her life to just like really see it clearly, and then like kind of reassess everything. And like yeah, so I think it's just like important to be able to like take like a step back and just see everything, and like try out new things and like be yourself away from your family, like your given family, with like your found family. So yeah.
Well, I'd love to hear from anyone else if there's anything on that you are curious about, but any other themes that you really stuck out to you in the book.
Yeah, I actually wanted to point out, as an older reader too, having read this with Caleb being gay, I kind of picked up on the found queer family aspect of it from more Caleb's perspective. I think Maisie picked up on it a little bit too, with Caleb's two roommates, and just how that formed a supportive family for Callum when he wasn't at home. And that really hits me really deeply as a queer person myself. And I explore a lot of queer themes in my own writing. And just, even if you have a supportive family and home life, I think for queer people, it's really important to find community and people who either understand your identity because it's theirs, or have gone through similar things that maybe your family doesn't understand because they themselves are not queer. And in The Art of Running Away, I felt like that was really something I latched onto every time I got to read a scene with Callum and his roommates, or when Maisie was being taken out when Callum was at work and had to go with Rose and everyone else. And it was almost like she had become a little sister, like an adopted little sister, I suppose. And I really love that within the story.
Yeah, and I feel like found family just gives you perspective on what different kinds of family can be, like whether you have a good experience with your given family or a bad experience. That's often the only experience that you will ever have until you go out looking for a new family. That if you have a found family, it can give you options. And I think especially in a queer space, that's really important, because you can kind of pick and choose like what you personally need in your life and your future, and what you want to give back as well.
Well, and I think AJ, probably picked up on the found family in the same way you, because it's interesting that you didn't think, Sabrina, that there was the found family in it, but like that was one of the first things I picked up on, was just how much I loved it was Callum's found family, but by the end of it, it feels like the found family grew a little bit. I don't know. I think I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think I knew that there was the secondary like found family like Callum part of it, but it didn't occur to me that like Maisie was also a part of that in a way, until like this morning, where I was like, oh yes, I guess she's part of like both of these two families, that like one of them is her given family, and then Callum has his own like found family, and she's like right there in the middle, and then also kind of has like is forming her own relationships and her own like individual like family with like the different parts of those families, which yeah, I think is just like, it really helps with her growth throughout the story, just to be able to just see everything more clearly and to kind of be able to like get different perspectives on the world.
I think that's what enables her to make her own choices by the end of it too, rather than feeling obligated one way or another.
Yeah, like at the beginning, I think she thinks that she's making her own choices. And in some ways she is, but then in other ways she is like definitely influenced just by the fact that she's very like sheltered and like she's always lived in the same place and has been around the same people her whole life. So I think after like meeting more people and just like being away from where she's always been, she has like more space to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I know, kind of going away from found family, and I know, AJ, you have also explored it in your writing. I've not gotten the pleasure to read anything that you've written yet, Esme. Soon, hopefully. Soon, hopefully. But the idea of like travel and going on like this great big adventure, I know, Sabrina, you said that was really important to you and kind of was the found. So I'd love to hear from any of y'all just kind of what the inspiration is to kind of including these huge adventure kind of stories or, you know, travel within the stories.
Well, I can say the very superficial reason for Ellen Outside the Lines being set in Barcelona is because I used to work for a company that was based in Barcelona, and I traveled there, I think 5 times for business and didn't really get to do anything for fun. So I was like, I'm going to write a book there so I can go back and be a tourist and basically call this work. But also, when I was growing up, Ellen is 13 in this book, and this is her first trip abroad. I was a little bit older when I first went abroad the first time, but my dad traveled internationally when I was a kid, and he would always bring back like little souvenirs. And even this was way back before the time of the euro. So he would bring me back old, like pocket change, like Deutschmarks and francs and all that stuff. And I would collect them, and he would bring me back newspapers in different languages and stuff. And I feel like it broadened my understanding of the world a little bit, because I grew up in small towns in the Midwest, mostly in the South, and being autistic, I used to have a very black and white interpretation of what the world is or should be. And I think being given a window into other cultures, even if it was a really small one, opened my mind a little to the fact that just because something feels normal or routine to me doesn't make it normal or routine for someone living somewhere else, or maybe someone even in my own classroom has a different experience than me. So when I was working on Ellen Outside the Lines, which is about an autistic 13-year-old kid, I really wanted to explore that aspect of living in Barcelona, because one of the things that surprised me when I was there is I made the assumption that it's in Spain, everyone speaks Spanish. And that's not actually the case in Barcelona. A lot of people speak Catalan, which is a language I didn't know existed before I started traveling there. So just little details like that, I wanted to kind of open my character's eyes and realize that even what we're taught in school, because Ellen's traveling with a Spanish class, is not necessarily the only information that you can get about a different place. Because I know Ellen was thinking, well, we didn't learn this in class. So I wanted to explore that a little bit. And then I decided I just upend this poor character's life. And instead of doing normal field trips and lectures, it kind of gets sprung on them very early on that they're going to switch the trip itinerary to a scavenger hunt format, which my character really likes routine, and she had already like written out all the itineraries. So that was a little upsetting. And then kind of the big twist too is that she ended up getting put onto a scavenger hunt team that didn't include the best friend she's trying to reconnect with. And that kind of goes back to the found family stuff too. But I just felt like putting it in a different location, kind of upending this person's life and being in a different city with different languages being spoken around, lots of different sensory input, would be kind of an eye-opener for her and hopefully for readers as well, that your norms are not everyone else's norms. And it's okay to be upset by that initially, but also you have to accept and kind of learn from it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that the first big trip of a kid's life is like, it changes them. Because you grow up, I think it's similar to the family versus found family in that you're in your bubble, you're in your world, and that world is your entire world. And you have these assumptions about other places and other people. And then you go to these places and your whole mind is blown apart, whether it's for the good or the bad. And that's definitely something that I explore in my debut. Callie has a lot of preconceptions of what they think Helston is going to be. and it's going to be this big, amazing opportunity to be exactly what they want, and they go there and that is not the way it is at all. So they kind of have to reevaluate their dreams and how they're going to achieve those. But I don't think that would have happened unless they had done this traveling and seen different places and different people.
It's funny because I feel like my thoughts on travel are like so similar to both of yours as well. Where like from like a very young age, I've been so interested in just like the idea that like I was living my life like in this like one spot, like in this bubble, just doing my like ordinary like daily life stuff, and that like all over the world other people were doing the same thing and had like quite similar lives in a lot of ways, but also like very different lives in a lot of ways, and we're like speaking totally different languages and has totally different cultures. And I always thought that was the coolest thing, and I've always just wanted to travel and live in different places, which I've tried to do as much as I can. And also I forget, one of you said it's kind of like comparing it to the found family like idea. I think there's a lot of similarities with like the travel aspect, where like with Maisie, like the found family helps her to kind of separate herself from her family and like see her life from a more of like a distant perspective. And I think her like traveling abroad for the first time is the same thing, where she's on her own for the first time. She like has to be very responsible and make her own decisions and like just think about things like for herself as opposed to like within like her family for the first time. And I think that there's just so much growth that happens from like both of those things, which was really cool to explore. And also something I just really like about like myself when I travel. I feel like I grow a lot just like being on my own in random places, and just like I'm just like in Korea now, like by myself, which like is super cool. But yeah, like definitely a growing thing, I think.
Well, one thing I think is interesting in your book, The Art of Running Away, is that both Callum and Maisie, they both travel, but for like very different. One of them is Callum obviously is traveling to escape, but his sister is obviously traveling to not escape, to try to bring them back together. So I don't know if was that intentional, like the idea of the two different types of travel, was that intentional?
No, it wasn't, but I do think like while I was writing, it was interesting to kind of explore both of those, where in a way both of them did not want to go abroad, because Callum like didn't want to go abroad, he like had to, and Maisie also did not want to go abroad, her parents like forced her to, but then after that she like makes the choice to kind of go after him in London. And I think they definitely have like kind of like this like cat and mouse thing going on in the story, which was very fun to play with, especially because like in the situation she's like the younger one who should have like less responsibility and control of the situation, whereas he's like 10 years older than her and like a whole adult and like has a life and things like that. But like she's like very much the one like pulling the strings, I think, in the situations in the book, which was just like fun to play with because he had like no idea how to handle that, but like also was happy kind of for her to be doing that in a way as well. So
Are there any other themes that anyone else like really kind of picked up on that they wanted to mention?
I really love that even though Maisie's parents are incredibly flawed, I like that they can still have a relationship by the end of the book. And it's more on Maisie's terms, and it's more like give and take rather than them prescribing what Maisie and Callum should be. And they actually listen to her. It's really nice to see. And I know that you struggle with parents because all middle grade writers struggle with parents, but I think you tackled it very well.
Thank you. That was definitely like, I think the hardest part of writing this book was the parents, like not only because for most of the book they're not on the page because Maisie's in London and they're in New York, but just trying to find a balance where like I didn't want them to be just these like monster like villain characters, but I also like didn't want to just have them be forgiven for the things that they did, because the things that they did were very harmful. So it was like trying to make sure what they did wasn't too like so unbelievably extreme that like there was no way for there to be like somewhat of a hopeful ending, because that was always something that I was going for in the book, but also making sure that like it was handled respectfully in terms of the characters, because that was really important to me. So yeah, they were definitely, I spent like probably the most time revising on just like trying to get the parent relationship as good as I could.
And I think showing that good people can do bad things and bad people can be redeemed is a really important aspect of middle grade that I think has often been neglected, but is coming back.
Yeah, I think that was something I was like really interested in exploring in this book, where like Maisie's parents they're not trying to be bad people, and like, you know, they are good people. They like, their biggest flaw is just really like loving their children too much, which I think was just a really interesting thing to explore, because they're not trying to hurt anyone, and they don't think that they're hurting anyone. But I think that like that's their biggest issue, is that they don't realize that what they're doing is harmful, and they can't, because they love their children so much, they can't accept that their love is harmful. So yeah, that was complicated to explore, but I enjoyed doing it.
And I imagine that it can be read like a couple of different ways, because I know as a queer person, it was always quite evident to me of one perspective, but I can also imagine like cishet people would read it and be like, oh yes, I understand the rationality for these parents, just like the way that Maisie understands it in the beginning, and then later on she starts to question it. I think that's a really important thing for readers to understand.
Yeah, that was hard. I just, in general, as like while I was writing it, found it very hard to forgive the parents, like personally. So that was like, I guess, a lot of it too, like trying to figure out if what I was doing and like if the way I was telling the story, like even like realistically made sense, that there would be like any form of like even like a small amount of like redemption or forgiveness like allowed. So I also like kind of the intensity of like what happened in that plot line changed a lot. I think even like, you read more intense versions.
I think I did, yes.
Yeah, where like it, and then I've also had versions that were even like less intense in terms of like what they did that caused Callum to leave home. So it was very much like me trying to find like a balance and not have it, because if it was too intense, there was just no way that I could have them be forgiven or like even remotely forgiven in the story. So yeah.
And I'm curious how, I would love to hear even more of your process, how you developed, because the parents felt very, very well developed, but you don't see, they're not in the book for very, like, you know, they're other than some phone calls and here and there. How did you go about really crafting the arcs for them when they're not really there a whole time?
That makes me so happy, because I felt like they were so not they were just really hard in general. So I tried to just kind of give them both like a few just like stronger characteristics that like would hopefully just help them to stand out. Like I wanted the dad, I made him like very just like creative and like artsy, so I was hoping that would like be strong enough to kind of stand on its own, even though he wasn't in the book. And the mom is very like very fierce and like bold and driven in a way that I like also think she was easier for me because she's more like proactive, I think, in the relationship. So like her like phone calls to Maisie and like their texts were like more, I think, like vivid in the book. So her dad was a lot harder for me, because I also wanted a contrast between the parents, because I thought that like having one who was like very involved in the children's lives and like the other who kind of struggled a little bit with that would like just add a lot more layers to the whole situation that was happening. But yeah, it did make it difficult to sometimes, I feel like, have both of them in there. And then especially because Maisie's usually interacting with like one or the other, not both of them at the same time, that was difficult as well. But yeah, I tried to mainly just like have a few like boldish like characteristics of them that hopefully stuck out.
Well, I'm curious, AJ, because you've also written your middle grade, your second middle grade is about to come out. So I'm curious how you kind of approached parents, especially writing parents of a queer child, and how, I'm just curious what your process was for that and how it differed.
So for Anna on the Edge, Anna's a child in a single parent home. The dad's not really in the picture, although when Anna meets a transgender boy at the rank named Hayden and meets his family, she sees how um, basically just involved both parents are in Hayden's life and how supportive they are of his identity. And Anna lives in San Francisco. Her coach is gay, and her mom is very supportive of her coach and has never said anything derogatory about queer people. And yet there was still this thread that I wanted to pull through of this uncertainty when Anna was realizing that she herself was non-binary and how mom might react to Anna, because it's a very different to see, I think, a parent be supportive of a queer relative or a queer friend, as opposed to sharing something really personal about yourself with your parent and hoping that they also accept you in the same way. And I think I'm not a parent personally, but I've talked to a lot of parents since Anna on the Edge has come out, and just talking about how it's very different when it's your own kid who's coming out. And that doesn't mean that they love you any less, but sometimes it takes them a little bit longer to come around to an acceptance. And I really wanted to portray that with the mother character. And a lot of people don't know what non-binary means too. I think especially people who are a little bit older than us, maybe have never heard the term, or they've heard it in passing, but don't really know what it encapsulates in terms of identity. So my goal is always to make Anna's mom very supportive, but also be a little bit confused when Anna comes out as non-binary, because she doesn't know what it means initially. So that was my aim there. With Ellen's family, I related so much to what Sabrina said about trying to make these parents feel three-dimensional when they're not necessarily on the page in every scene, because they're a half an ocean away, basically half a world away. Ellen's dad is on the trip with her, the study abroad trip, but the mom is not. And I know that was something that I struggled with, is trying to make the mom as three-dimensional as possible when all we're getting is texts and a couple of FaceTime conversations. And my editor was actually the one who was like, give this mother a personality. So I kind of made her a little bit wacky. She was like so lonely not to be on this trip, basically, that she decided to take up a bunch of different hobbies like cross stitching, and she got a cactus and named him David, and was determined not to kill him because she is a plant killer apparently, and stuff. But yeah, it's really important in middle grade to, if you're not in a situation where the parents are dead and your main character is an orphan, which happens a lot, I think, in middle grade fantasy at least, I think it's really important to focus on parental relationships, because they are such a big part of your main character's lives in most instances. I mean, with Anna, she couldn't even take public transit on her own, basically, without the mom having to help out with that, because you're not at that age where you can kind of go off on your own yet. So it's almost like, for me, I had to write separate bios for these characters, these adult characters, and get a sense of what their background was. I must have written like several pages of just their history and their childhood and what made them who they were. And then you get maybe 1 or 2 line references to that. I don't know if anyone else does that, but it helps me get a better sense of how they might react to things, even though they're not the stars of the story.
Yeah, I feel like you need the whole bio of the parents and then the grandparents, the great grandparents, because everyone just rolls onto each other. Super fun.
Well, what I think is, oh, sorry.
And then they get like 1 line in there, 1 reference to the 15 pages you wrote about their childhood. Yeah.
But what I think is super cool in The Art of Running Away is we get to see parents who, the first time that they had to deal with a queer child, maybe they didn't do it the best, but like, it's exciting. Maybe it's not the same issue that we're getting to now. I don't know what this is. My question is here, but like we have, Maisie's best friend who, is, so like, obviously Maisie can't imagine her parents ever, like, so obviously they've grown. So I think that was just a really like interesting way to show growth in the parents without, there wasn't really much to do there. Yeah. I don't know what the question was there, but I loved that.
That was, I think, a lot of like with the parents' growth, I had to kind of show it as opposed to kind of have it happen on the page. Because also, I mean, like everything that happened with Callum happened like several years before the story even starts. So a lot of it was just trying to like, even like from like the very first chapter, I tried to just like have like layers of like showing that they're not the same as they were, like very clearly when like he then like talks about his life at home like years earlier. So that was like a lot of my revisions, was like adding in like just like little lines and sentences that like made it like showed that the parents were different now and had changed. And then once Maisie learns what they did, it's her kind of then having to like think about all of those things that like she's seen those little things and like realizing like, oh, like I do see that they have been making an effort and they really have been trying, and like that there has been this growth. And I also just like in general really loved like the 10-year age gap between Maisie and Callum. I think that it like just created such like, they're in some ways not that much, like there's not a huge age gap, like 10 years isn't that big, but it also is like really big. So I think just exploring that as well and seeing how much can change in just a short amount of time, and how their like just perspectives on life and like of their own town are so different, was just really like an interesting thing to explore in the book.
I love the big sibling age gaps because you have the shared experience of like growing up with the same people, but it's also such a long way away that, you know, people change so much and you change a lot too. And having a sibling that young or that old is very different.
Well, I think what was really cool about the age gap as well is Maisie was able to not only like see her parents' growth, but also get a really exciting lesson in allyship from her brother who's already gone through, like that was one of, because I don't think I've seen a whole ton of that in middle grade, just like a real lesson in allyship and what that looks like and what you should like. And so I thought that was really, really great as well.
That's the thing that stood out to me most in this wonderful book, because I think I read it in one sitting. I was DMing you whilst I was reading and it was amazing, but that was what really made it stand out as special and something that everybody needs to read, because yeah, you don't get many books about being an ally. And I think this is just a really good resource, honestly, for kids and for parents on how to approach this, because, you know, Maisie does make mistakes, parents make mistakes, but they grow and they learn and they're doing their best to be better.
Yeah, I think that was something I was like, particularly once I started, I didn't necessarily set out to even write about allyship, but once I did, I realized I was like really interested in the topic, because I think it's a lot more complicated than like it initially tends to appear on the surface, and there are a lot of layers. And I was like, I feel like it's a very complicated thing that hopefully I kind of scratched the surface of like decently in the book. But yeah, like as I was writing it, I realized just like how complicated it actually is. And like, even, you know, like Maisie thinks that she is being supportive and that she's being a good ally, but like she has to then learn, like, just because she thinks that she is being a good ally doesn't necessarily mean that she is being a good ally. And I think even just showing like she has this conversation with one of Callum's roommates where like his roommate even admits that like she still has trouble with this, you know, like, and she's 10 years older than Maisie, and it's just like a very complicated, difficult thing that requires a lot of like introspection and growth. So yeah, that was a complicated thing and like difficult part of writing this book, but I think it's part of like one of my favorite parts of the book too.
I think it's really wonderful because it's a lesson that even adults can take away, is that a lot of times when you think you're an ally, there might be instances where you're doing this inadvertently, but you're still centering yourself in the conversation when it's not about you, especially when it comes to intersectional conversations. And I'm mostly in the queer space, so I keep bringing it back there too. But when we talk about being an ally to queer people, there's a very different experience of being queer if you're white as opposed to a queer person of color. And I sometimes want to speak about the experience of being queer, but oftentimes white people who are queer are the only people who are listened to in this conversation. And sometimes being an ally within my own community is stepping aside and letting someone else who's more marginalized than me speak on a specific subject so that we can understand their experience as well. And with Macy here, she had to do that for her brother because there were several instances, I think, where she was like, I am being supportive. And then Callum had to be like, actually, Callum's whole thing was like, he'd just get broody and quiet and stuff. But yeah, she basically had to learn that. And it's such a complicated conversation. And you broke it down in such a digestible way for this age category. But I think it's also very beneficial for adults to read too, because we should always be striving to evaluate our actions, I think, and work to do better. So I love this as an example of it because like Jacob said, we don't see this a lot in the middle grade space or like really anywhere, to be honest.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Well, great. I think AJ, you have some giveaway winners to announce.
Yes.
And while you do that, if anyone watching, there's some great chat happening in the chat on YouTube. If anyone has any questions before we finish off for the evening, drop them in the chat. And while you drop there, I will let AJ announce the winners.
Yes. So I am giving away a copy of The Art of Running Away, and Esme is actually donating a copy too. So we have 2 winners instead of 1. And this was, for those who are unaware, this was a giveaway that was held for the last week on Twitter. And before this event started, I drew the winners' names. So the first winner's name is Kaylee Holford. Their Twitter handle is @Kaylee Holford. And the second winner is Mrs. Hubble. The Twitter handle is @busymom_74. So congratulations to both of you. We will be in touch via Twitter DM to get your addresses so we can send you your copy of this wonderful book. And thank you for participating.
Amazing. I see more great chat happening in YouTube, but no specific questions. But I will bring, it sounds like someone was asking a question of themselves, but I will ask it of y'all as well, just because it sounds like a good question. Benjamin asked, I love your comments on the complexity of writing so-called villains. One thing I heard from a writer, which I try to apply to my own writing, is to ask myself after I write a draft, is this loving? I would love your thoughts. Is this loving?
I think I really like gray characters. I'm a big fan of gray characters, but I also like just the real bad guys too. And that's definitely something that I have in Callie, where I have a lot of gray characters that, you know, they come from a loving place, but they make mistakes. And then I have my baddie who's just baddie. So I think there's room for both. And I think that the difference between those is a really fun thing to play with, especially in middle grade. Because I do think kids as well see things much more black and white than grown-ups do. And, you know, a lot of stories are about the learning curve of seeing things in a little bit more of a gray space.
I agree with that. I think so. Even like in my child murder book, which was my first book, I didn't actually really have villains. Like I've never really written like a true villain before. I personally I feel like I just empathize so much with any character I end up writing that it's hard for me to just write someone who's like purely has like totally bad intentions and is evil, even though I love reading those books. But yeah, I think there's just, especially like the characters who are like so gray area that like to themselves their intentions are good and like from their perspective they are doing a good thing. Those are always characters that I find like really interesting to read about and write, so I tend to like gravitate toward those in my own writing.
I'd say in Anna on the Edge, the only real bad guy was Anna's own hangups about certain things that were becoming obstacles to her basically coming out. The perception that her single mom didn't have enough money to pay for her sport, so she didn't want to cause more complications by coming out and needing a new program to move away from the princess theme program that had just been choreographed. And in Ellen Outside the Lines, it's more about the ebbs and flows of friendship breakups, basically, and making new friendships. And it was really important for me not to villainize unrealistically Ellen's best and only friend, Laurel, who's someone that she's growing apart from, but doesn't want to be. I've been in similar situations, especially in elementary school and middle grade, where a close friend of mine has become friends with other people that I maybe don't like. And of course, to me, those friends are the villains. I don't have anything in common with them. Maybe some things they say I take offense to. And I wrote that all into Ellen. So I guess those are sort of the villains, but I also kind of knew their backgrounds too. Like one of the girls was going through a divorce situation at home, so she was a little bit snappy, and just making sure that they're fully realized. I mean, even if you're writing someone who's completely unredeemable, they can't just be a cartoon, villain with the little devil ears. They need to have a backstory and usually reasons for taking the actions they do. So just making sure that you're not villainizing anyone unnecessarily is really important to me when I write, especially because I write mostly contemporary stories too. So hopefully no one in my stories come off as being completely unredeemable without reason.
Yeah, I feel like it's harder to write Black and white characters in a contemporary space.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas like for fantasy, you can have a few more tropes, which is fun. I definitely enjoyed specifically having an unredeemable villain, because usually I have like vast backstories where we can definitely excuse him for his terrible things. And we have a little bit of backstory that he's not a good person.
Megan asked a great question, which I think is a wonderful kind of just end to our discussion, unless another great question comes in. But Megan asked, what was everyone's favorite scene and or chapter of The Art of Running Away?
Ooh.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I just grabbed I'm like, hold on a second.
And so while we're all looking, Sabrina, I would love to hear some of your favorite parts to write.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite parts are all of just the parts where Maisie and Callum interact. I had so much fun with their relationship. They're like just so funny in the same room because they're so like opposite in personality and in just like in so many ways, and they have this huge age gap. And there's so many reasons why they shouldn't like each other, but they do like each other, and like trying to navigate that, like both of them, they just like they struggle, but like in a very like earnest way. And it was just I just really enjoyed that. So I also really I love writing angsty scenes, but I also like humor. And I do think most of my angsty scenes also have humor in them. So those were always like just any of those scenes were really fun to write. I think my favorite scene to write was not the Shrek bet scene. I can't believe we haven't even talked about that.
I just want to say that every time I flip my copy open, it automatically opens on the Shrek chapter.
Honestly, like same. It's like right in the middle. But there's a scene like right after that. So they have this ridiculous Shrek bet thing, and then they go to the ridiculous finance museum, and then there's like a scene after that where it's like they're leaving the finance museum, and I feel like it's the first time they're both like kind of real with each other in the book, but it's also still like funny, hopefully. And like I just really like that scene because I felt like they finally had like both opened up, because I don't even think Maisie realized that she was like closing herself off. I mean, she was like intentionally closing herself off, but like I don't think she realized the extent that she was like pushing Callum away. So I think it was the first time they both kind of like gave some ground on that. So I enjoyed writing that scene.
I think my favorite scene to read was when Maisie first sees Callum again, and just her observations of how different he is and this awful stuffy adult who she does not connect to anymore. And you just know that there's going to be a great arc there. It was really exciting to read.
Yeah, I love the scenes where they were kind of trying to get to know each other after Macy had done something silly that she didn't realize was silly at the time, and the awkwardness between the two of them. I think there were a couple scenes like that. And I also wanted to just say, like, one of my favorite things about this book is you just published something, I think, in School Library Journal about your voice being too mature. A couple agents had said that. But like, if you flip through this and you read the chapter titles on everything, it's like so classically middle grade to me. Like, these chapter titles are amazing. Like,
I loved writing the chapter titles. That was really fun.
Chapter 1, this cat is more iconic than me. Chapter 19, I do something bad. Just like stuff like that. Or like, we don't go to jail for feeding swans. Sometimes people aren't awful. I love those so much. And the Shrek stuff too. Like, I'm not a Shrek stan, but you almost made me one reading this book. It was so funny to me that there was so many references to that and that everyone got it. And even though I'm not a huge fan of the movies, I knew exactly what you were talking about.
you can feel the love in this book.
Mhm.
That's good.
On the page and like in the voice, and you can tell that you love this book.
And while of course I adore the scenes where Callum and Maisie are together, I also adore Maisie with Callum's friends without Callum.
Yeah.
Because I feel like she learns so much about Callum through them. Because he doesn't let his guard down for a while. And while they're still kind of secretive and quiet, but like, I think there's just some really interesting stuff that happens with them, which I thought was really great as well.
Yeah, no, they were really fun to write. They were just, I wish that I had like any scenes just of Rose and Benji together. If I could have somehow like just had a scene with them, like only, I feel like that would have just been a disaster in like the best way. But yeah, they were really fun. And yeah, I'll just write it as like an extra. But yeah, they were really fun to write. And also Alicia, I wish there had been like more of her as well, because I think especially like the happy parts of her relationship with Maisie, like they have a really fun friendship, which that was much easier to portray over text than Maisie's relationship with her parents. But yeah, I liked that too, I think.
Wonderful. Well, before we sign off, I would love if everyone would just go around and just let people know where they can find you on the interwebs, if they want to purchase your book or just give you a follow. I'm Jacob, and you can find me at A Very Queer Book Club on pretty much any platform.
Oh, me? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm Sabrina. You can find me at Sab Kleckner, like basically anywhere. And there's like buy links to my book on my website, which is just sabrinakleckner.com. So yeah.
Are we all doing this?
Yes,
Okay.
we are.
Just checking. All right. You can find me pretty much anywhere, like Instagram and Twitter at Matokah, Matokah. I'm also allegedly on TikTok under that handle.
You are.
I post a
follow you.
video like once every 3 months, and it's mostly not writing related. It's mostly skating. And I think on Facebook, I'm like / author AJ or something. My website is sassandsf.com.
I live on Twitter at Esme Symes-Smith, and my website is eSymesSmith.com. And I don't have anything more exciting to say.
Amazing. Well, The Art of Running Away is out now from Jollyfish Press. It is so wonderful. Everyone should buy it. Thank you all for joining me this evening. It was such a lovely conversation.
Thank you for talking with me about my book. This was so fun.
Of course.
Happy book birthday.
Happy book
Thank
birthday.
you.